Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Marie-Pierre St-Onge, who is a nutrition scientist and a pioneer in the field of sleep health. Today, we're talking about foods and nutrients that promote healthy sleep, gut microbiome effects, aging, menopause, diabetes risk and weight gain, napping, melatonin and sleep supplements, and so much more. So stay tuned. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Marie-Pierre St-Onge, who is a nutrition scientist, a pioneer in the field of sleep health, and is the founding director of the Center of Excellence for Sleep and Circadian Research at Columbia University. And her research is so remarkable, covers so many interesting topics. It's going to be a very full hour of discussion, but she likes to focus, or at least a lot of her work in lab focus on the impact of lifestyle, specifically sleep and diet, on cardiometabolic risk factors. And much more about her and her full bio will be on the episode page. Dr. St-Onge, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I came across your profile and because of so many mutual colleagues, and I just could not believe how interesting the work you do is. And I just felt like this is the piece that's missing, at least in my podcast, is the concept of sleep and then how it affects so many other aspects and vice versa. So can you just share with the audience really what's your main topics that you like to focus on, but you've hit so many, so we'll get into those as well. But I really just want to hear it from you. What's your area of study that you can share?
Yeah, so I started off looking at the impact of sleep for weight management, obesity risk. My research focuses on cardiometabolic health, so everything that influences the heart, body composition, blood pressure, insulin resistance, how your body handles sugars. All of that influences your risk for cardiovascular disease. And how is sleep instrumental to this cardiometabolic health?
And so you're really describing human beings in modern day time with all of the
Absolutely.
constraints of being overworked, underappreciated. Oh, I didn't mean to say that, but overworked, kids' lifestyle, lots of junk food out there. So hitting, there's just so many areas. What most recently you've done a lot of work, I think, at least I'm looking at all of your papers. You have so many papers. You were looking at a lot of what I find very interesting at this moment, ultra-processed food consumption and chronic insomnia. How does food relate to our sleep well-being in terms of how we feel?
Yeah, so my research is coming full circle because I started in nutrition. My PhD is in nutrition, and I was very interested in evaluating how various foods influence cardiovascular health,
Right.
and then progressed into the field of sleep and how sleep was important for cardiovascular health. But now we're finding that sleep and diet are closely interlinked, and how well you sleep influences your food choices, your dietary intakes, but now really looking at how what you eat during the day influences how well you sleep at night. So that's what I've been very passionate about over the past few years, and where my research is really going for the future.
Yeah, that was so interesting because so much of what we've kind of learned about is how our sleep affects everything else. But what what you've been able to tease out is how what we choose for food, what we choose in terms of lifestyle literally goes backwards towards affecting our sleep, which we know is so critical.
Yes. And I like to think about it as a cycle, right? So how well you eat during the day can have an impact on how well you sleep at night, and how that can influence how well you eat during the day. And so you kind of hopefully propel yourself into a healthful cycle of having a healthy diet during the day that leads to good sleep at night, that helps you make good food choices during the day and keeps reinforcing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so to step back a little, let's talk about what sleep is, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
What is sleep and why do all mammals, and I think even down to single-celled organisms, right, require some degree of sleep? Will you just kind of go into that
Yeah.
anthropologically or evolutionarily?
Yeah, so sleep is instrumental for health. It's a way to, recover, replenish, repair, grow, learn. All of these things happen during sleep and as a result of having good sleep. Um, but we often think of sleep as something that's very passive. I think of sleep as something that's very dynamic because your sleep at night is not the same if you're looking at your sleep in the first hour or two and in the last hour or two of the sleep period. So I think it's a fascinating field of study where you have multiple ways of intervening, multiple ways in which sleep is impacting health by different different modalities throughout the night.
And in a typical sleep cycle, is it how many cycles are there? When do we get REM sleep? When does that come in? Rapid eye
Right. So
movement.
that's basically what I was getting at, that, you know, when you talk about cycles, so sleep is happens in cycles. So you have the full night period. Hopefully you get about 7, close to it, let's say 6.5 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Each cycle is about an hour and a half. And so you would cycle through about 5. You'd have 5 cycles uh, of sleep throughout the full sleep period. And during each of these, we call them cycles because you go through various stages. So you start your sleep cycle in a light stage of sleep, and then you go into deeper stages of sleep, and then you get rapid eye movement sleep. And rapid eye movement sleep happens towards the end of each cycle, but each cycle is not identical throughout the night. So your first cycle is not the same as your last cycle. In the first cycles of sleep, you have more deep sleep. And in the last cycles of sleep, you have more rapid eye movement sleep. And that's why you tend to remember your dreams if you're woken up in the middle of your rapid eye movement sleep phase early in the morning. You might remember what you were dreaming about.
And so if you're, just this is just a bigger picture. I just want to make sure the audience understands the value and sort of how you break up sleep. So during those cycles, if anything stops you, restless leg, my cat walking on my head, anything, babies crying, whatever breaks up that sleep.
You're back to you're back to step one.
Okay.
So let's say we call those stages, right? So you have stage 1, 2, 3, and then rapid eye movement sleep. So if you're if you get woken up in stage 2 or aroused in a way, you get back to stage 1 when you start again. And if you're in stage 3, 4, and then something arouses you, you're back into 2 or 1. So you're not getting the full cycle if you're getting interrupted in your sleep.
And does that play into sort of the deficit in getting REM or rapid eye movement sleep, which is that the most restorative
So
part
we talk
of
about
stages?
deep sleep as being more restorative, but also rapid eye movement sleep. They each have their own purpose, but we want to have more of deep sleep. That's what helps you dissipate sleepiness. But rapid eye movement sleep is also quite important for um, memories and learning. And so you want to have all of the cycles of sleep, and you want to have uninterrupted sleep so you can get into the deeper and the rapid eye movement stages.
So for people who have interrupted sleep for any number of reasons that they're either working on or haven't really fully figured out solutions for, they can restore their sleep if they get back to sleep, assuming their body picks up and restarts, and they can have ample additional time. It's not all lost, right?
It's not all lost. No, no, but you do want to have uninterrupted sleep as much as possible. And that's why individuals, for example, who have sleep apnea,
Mhm.
they may get quite a bit of sleep. They might get a full night's sleep, but because of the apnea, they're aroused. So they're kind of brought back into a lighter stage of sleep. They never reach deep sleep. And so even though they may have had 6, 7 hours of sleep, they wake up still sleepy.
Interesting. And sleep apnea for the audience, just so you know, is really around. It's basically you're not getting enough oxygenation while you sleep either because your neck has closed in a little bit on your breathing tubes, or I mean, primarily it's mechanical.
It's periods of yeah, cessations in breathing that occur repeatedly throughout the night. And because you stop breathing or have very reduced airflow, you gasp and snore and get aroused and awakened in a way.
Right. So that's something people can think about if they snore. That's kind of an indication to get additional
Hmm.
information about
Yes. Not all
snoring.
snoring, but
Right.
very loud snoring with gasping. You're if you have a bed partner, they would tell you that could be scary. They could notice that you stop breathing and then you start again. So
And if you're sleeping on your back and you snore versus sleeping on your side when you snore, that has, sort of different risk factors. Is that, in terms of generally?
well, you can have sleep apneas in different body positions, but it tends to happen more so on your back because of the anatomy and closing of the airways. Mhm.
Cool. So, and those can be worked up for people who are listening.
Yes.
These are things that can be easily evaluated through, pulmonary, sleep specialist evaluations, and it's often very worth it. I know personally in my household
Yes.
that it can really change your energy level in your life. In
It's
term,
treatable. So I
yeah.
think that's, very important. If you have something that could be treated and reduce your risk for future disease, then it's all worth it for sure.
So this is really great. So in terms of when we started talking about sort of nutrients and food quality, what were some of the findings that you've found over all your, you've done so much work in this area. Tell us a little bit about what we should know about the quality of our food, processed or otherwise, and also even getting into nutrients that you've seen are beneficial and promoting quality sleep.
Hmm. Yeah. So I'll start off with like the big picture. So we've done, research from population-based studies where we look at overall diet quality. So from, US-based large-scale population studies, we've shown that people who have a diet that more closely resembles a Mediterranean diet, so if you're not very familiar with the Mediterranean diet, tends to emphasize more fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and seeds and liquid oils and not solid fats. Um, More fish and lean meats, but m fewer servings over a week, um, less sweets and desserts, less refined foods. So those types of having a diet that's closer to this type of diet is associated with having less risk for developing insomnia or poor sleep quality, obstructive sleep apnea as well. With a colleague of mine in France, we also looked at ultra-processed foods and found that that was also associated with increased risk of insomnia
Mm.
in this population. So individuals who had more ultra-processed foods in their diet had a higher risk of developing insomnia over time. So those are, population observational studies. So what is it about the diet that predicts future poor sleep? But we've also done studies where we've looked at what participants eat in real time and their sleep that night and how and looked at which types of foods, which nutrients relate to their to sleep. The more recent publication that just came out in June showed that individuals who have more fruits and vegetables, basically, actually, we started off looking at the nutrients, right? So it was more carbohydrates. Having more carbohydrates was associated with less arousals. So
Mm.
those arousals, when we're talking about that, it's going back to a lighter stage of sleep. So you're not fully awakened, but you're moved into lighter sleep. So it's lower quality sleep when you have more arousals. So we found that having more carbohydrates was related to less arousals. And when we looked at the source of those carbohydrates, we found that fruits and vegetables
Mm.
were associated with having less arousals. Um, Fiber tended to also be related to less arousals. Having more magnesium is associated with less arousals. So, really showing that it was not any carbohydrates, but carbohydrates from healthful sources that were related to fewer arousals. And in the first study that we published in this area had shown that consuming more fiber was associated with having more deep sleep at night. So all of this work kind of uh, is congruent, right? Is also showing similar things that if you're having a healthier diet, higher in fiber, higher in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, that that is really to having better sleep at night, more deep sleep, and less risk of developing insomnia
It's
or
fascinating.
sleep difficulties.
Sleep difficulties. So, Mediterranean diet is probably one of the most well-studied diets,
Hmm.
in the world in terms of the peer-reviewed studies. And it's interesting because you're describing, as you said, the Mediterranean diet. Do you think, we've looked at sort of inflammation in regards to that diet as being, one of the most valuable if you're seeking to lower inflammation in your body from whatever cause. Do you think that plays a role here in terms of sleep? What's the inflammation sleep diet
Hmm.
connection, if you can make that?
Yeah, I think inflammation certainly plays a role. We also have a way to evaluate the inflammatory potential of the diet. There's a dietary inflammatory index, and so this index has also been shown to be associated with sleep. So having a lower inflammatory potential of your diet is associated with better sleep. And there's also other dietary profiles that have been shown to be associated with better sleep. If you're thinking more locally, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension has a food nutrient profile a food profile that's somewhat similar to a Mediterranean diet, lower in fat, I would say, than than what we find from a Mediterranean diet, but still advocating
Hmm.
more fruits and vegetables and whole grains and fish. Uh, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension diet also goes into types of dairy and having less sodium, but those similar patterns that showing that an association with better sleep.
And when it comes to certain foods, I know you've been asked this probably on every podcast, and every time, in real time, people want sort of which foods can help us sleep better. And you've done work with, medium chain triglycerides, which is basically coconut fats, and found some interesting findings compared to olive oil. You've talked about different nuts and tart cherries. Tell us a little bit about that layer deeper of what foods were really identified as really promoting better quality and quantity of sleep.
Yeah. So our research we showed fruits and vegetables as as a food group,
Mhm.
but there have been other studies that have been done, not in my lab, but other studies showing tomatoes, cherries. There's been studies, not very good studies, but on kiwi fruit. Um, then there's been very interesting studies to look at mechanisms and how eating different fruits can influence your melatonin levels. And there was a really, really cool study of bananas, pineapples, and oranges. And this study had found that drinking juice from these three different types of fruits increased the melatonin levels in the blood after 2 hours,
Hmm.
and what also was associated with reduced oxidative stress. So it had an antioxidant potential. So I think those studies of specific fruits are interesting. They provide mechanisms to
Right.
show how these foods can influence sleep.
And you're really describing food as medicine in a way, right? So,
Hmm. Hmm.
we are anthropologic beings. We've required a lot of nutrition and certain nutrients throughout history, including fiber, including these polyphenols, which you did work on. I saw in one of your many papers. So, does there happen to be a connection? And I know you've also done work in this area too, gut microbiome, in terms of which foods come into the gut and how they play a role in terms of the gut flora. So tell us what that connection might be.
Yeah, so we're evaluating that now. There's not so much human work in this field, right? So uh, right now we're thinking that could be a mechanism from animal studies or cell studies that these the gut microbiome increases your short chain fatty acids, and short chain fatty acids can influence circadian rhythms and lead to better sleep. So your circadian rhythms are what allow you to fall asleep and wake up at the right time of the day. That's where we're talking about, melatonin having a role in your ease to fall asleep related to those circadian rhythms. So that could be a potential mechanism by which the various foods and a healthier diet that influences the gut microbiome could lead to better sleep at night.
Because the small chain fatty acids, which are I call it like, microbe poop, but it's not really essentially that, but I'm trying to give people sort of a tangible. But the
Hmm.
gut microbiome eats in all these fibrous foods in a healthy gut, prebiotic foods, and then creates these small chain fatty acids that then can cross the blood-brain barrier.
Hmm.
And then you're saying that may have the effect on circadian rhythms because it gets to the brain.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. And so moving into, you just mentioned melatonin. This is a really interesting area. Tell us a little bit about what melatonin is and why it serves the body, so importantly throughout our, history and currently our physiology, and which foods and behaviors might upregulate melatonin if it's
Hmm.
beneficial.
Yeah, so melatonin is a marker of circadian rhythms. So melatonin levels start to rise before you fall asleep, and they get elevated throughout the night, and then they fall when you wake up. So it kind of helps to regulate your cycle of when to fall asleep and when to wake up. Um, and melatonin is usually not observed during the day, so no melatonin during the day, only at night. Melatonin is produced from tryptophan. So tryptophan is something that an amino acid that we get from foods and requires many different nutrients. That tryptophan requires many nutrients to be able to convert it to melatonin and to produce it in the body. So that's where, I think it's very interesting to note that, this hormone that regulates our circadian or that marks our circadian rhythms is something that is produced entirely uh, from nutrients in foods.
Yeah, so that's so interesting because I was watching some of your YouTube videos and other interviews, and I was trying to figure out a way to put this all together in terms of conversation. But really, tryptophan, we don't make it as humans in the body,
No.
similar to like vitamin K. We actually certain nutrients have to be created either by what we eat or by the microbes that create them, which is the case with vitamin K. But tryptophan has to come from food. And we often think about, for many people who know Thanksgiving in this part of the world, Thanksgiving, we think big turkey dinner, we think about all
Mhm.
the stuffing and all of the yummy foods, and we eat all day long. And it's one of those events that everyone just wants to roll up and go to sleep afterwards.
Yes.
Is that likely because of the tryptophan that's often released from turkey or hot milk in
Yeah.
when we're little, or is it really, you think, maybe from all the gluttony of the food and calories and sugar?
I think it's just from, oh, from the probably the gluttony as you put it. A lot of food all at once. You get warm. It's you know it,
The
all
alcohol,
things that
the
can yeah, the
family
alcohol is a
drama, all of
sedative.
that fun stuff
Yes,
just
yes.
wants you to go to sleep, right?
Yes, because if you think about it, right, you need to extract this amino acid from your foods. You have to process it. It has to get to the right places. It needs to then get converted. It's not a quick process. But to me, it's making sure that you have all the nutrients that you need at the ready when it's time to produce melatonin. So you don't want to have any deficiencies for producing the different hormones, and not just melatonin, but everything that you need for body.
And tryptophan, I mean, back in, I think it was the 80s, there was we don't get tryptophan as a supplement anymore in the US
Mhm.
because there was some kind of contamination issue that really scared the market. And so nowadays you can't, unless I'm wrong, go to the
Mhm.
supermarket and get, or health food store and get tryptophan tablets,
Right.
which again is the amino acid precursor to dopamine, which is a
Mhm.
hormone. So a lot of people eat foods like turkey, like warm milk, to get more tryptophan from their diet. which other foods or what might we be surprised by in terms of sources for tryptophan? And also, even foods have melatonin.
Hmm.
I noticed that you talk about. So tell us a little bit about those hacks in terms of getting those precursor tryptophan and also the
Yeah.
melatonin that actually is the more active component.
So seafood is very high in tryptophan. The lamb is also very rich in tryptophan. Lamb is also high in zinc, but there's also tryptophan in you know, eggs and dairy products and any foods that have complete proteins will have tryptophan. So animal proteins tend to have higher levels of tryptophan because they're complete. And tryptophan is one of those amino acids that's not found in every food. It's a limited amino acid. So some foods really have very little of it. Um, but you mentioned supplements. I don't tend to advocate for supplements. I think it's much better to eat a complete diet and get all of our nutrients from foods. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think right off my head, I was thinking, oh, well, if that's the case, do vegans have any problems with tryptophan? Because we often think about B12 and some other micronutrients that they
Hmm.
may deficient in. Have you heard of any tryptophan deficiencies, or is it something you
No,
can't really tease out? Or poor
no.
sleep in vegans?
Yeah, yeah, personally. Yeah, no, I haven't heard of tryptophan deficiencies, but
Because you need only so
sometimes,
little, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
And how does serotonin play into this whole? Is there a sequence that involves serotonin involved with
Yeah,
tryptophan? And
serotonin is a precursor to melatonin.
okay, so not only tryptophan, but serotonin also.
Yeah, so when you convert tryptophan to melatonin, it goes into multiple different metabolite intermediates, and serotonin is one of those intermediates that leads to that precedes melatonin as an outcome.
So the feel good hormone, serotonin, really
Also
important,
comes from tryptophan. Yeah.
also comes from tryptophan. And our gut also, as a
Hmm.
fun fact, has
Produces,
the
yes.
predominant amount of serotonin. I think, what is it, 85%, 90% in the gut as opposed to the brain. I mean, just something to think about when it comes to that food
Hmm.
combination.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. So we see that foods can be medicine. Foods can help sleep. Fiber can help gut microbiome, polyphenols. How about stress? Can you comment on stress and how that might affect this combination of gut, sleep, activity?
Yeah. So if I'm thinking about stress and how that could impact sleep, sometimes, there are different types of stress um, profile, stress, different profiles of people that in terms of how to deal with stress. If you're talking about psychological stress, right? So there is like the stress eaters and the stress starvers, I guess. I don't know. But like some people eat more when they're stressed. They tend to gravitate towards unhealthy foods when they're stressed. That could be, influencing, poorly influencing sleep. Uh, and then, of course, if you're stressed, you're not sleeping as well. You tend to ruminate. You tend to, have your brain keeps spinning and making it harder for you to fall asleep and calm down. So I think having calming activities is also something that's very important before bedtime, um, and being mindful of these things and trying to let go and get a clear mind before going to bed.
And if
There are
you're,
different strategies.
yeah,
Some people
for
like to
sure.
journal and to let go of their stress, do relaxation activities, meditation could be very helpful as well.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, and just even the pH of the gut and how that may play a role in the food benefits or what other downstream, things you're trying to improve in terms of end game of having better sleep. Intermittent fasting, I noticed that, you're also involved with intermittent fasting, understanding how when you eat earlier as your nutrition back when you eat earlier versus later, are there differences even if it's the same meal on sleep outcomes?
Yeah, so for sleep outcomes, the research hasn't been done to explicitly look at the impact of intermittent fasting, or we talk about time restricted eating also, and how that influences sleep. Most of the research has been done to look at the impact on weight management, or other cardiometabolic risk factors, uh, in terms of when to eat for better health, but not necessarily when to eat for better sleep. So that's where, there's a little bit of a need there to know, like, what happens, like if you're eating too close to bedtime, how is that going to impact your sleep? What's the optimal amount of hours to stop eating for better sleep? Um, and how will, you know, weight weight loss programs and the design of those programs, how do they influence your sleep? So far, what we know from the time restricted eating studies is that they don't adversely impact sleep.
Mm.
So if you're following one of those types of weight loss programs or dietary patterns, it won't have a negative impact on your sleep, which is something that's good to know.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
whether they'll improve your
Yeah.
sleep, that's something that needs to be seen, because most of the studies also don't necessarily enroll people who have poor sleep to begin with. So if your sleep is already good, making that change may not produce any benefit
Gotcha.
or additional benefit. Yeah.
And generally speaking, when you kind of stop eating a couple hours before you go to bed, maybe that influences the melatonin release.
Mhm.
Maybe is there that connection where just even having space between going into sleep cycles with melatonin release can have a benefit if you do hold off a few hours of eating before sleep?
Not that it will influence melatonin release per se, but eating when your melatonin levels rise is something that people are actively evaluating how that has may have adverse impact on cardiometabolic health, an adverse effect for weight management and other health status. Glucose regulation, for example, is something that people are actively looking.
Melatonin, as you know, getting it from food, getting it kind of innately from healthy lifestyles, really the goal. But so many people take melatonin supplements. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, whether or not you've seen in your studies where that's can be harmful, at what doses might be something to limit intake. And what are your thoughts on that supplement that's gotten so much attention?
Yeah, so melatonin as a supplement is not something that's advocated for day-to-day sleep, right? So you want to make sure that you have healthful sleep naturally, not necessarily with additional help, including melatonin. Melatonin can be helpful if you're trying to fight jet lag. So I mentioned earlier how melatonin was related to circadian rhythms, right?
Mm.
Allowing you to fall asleep and wake up at the right time of day. But not necessarily uh, a sleeping pill, right? To make you fall asleep right there and then at the moment. So for people with insomnia, for example, melatonin is not a first line treatment, so it's not something that's advocated for people to treat those types of sleep difficulties and disorders. It's for difficulties with timing of sleep and shouldn't be taken for over prolonged periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with everything that we take from outside the body, the potential is to downregulate our own production naturally. So, does it become sort of this negative cycle where we're dumbing down our body's ability to make the melatonin that's so incredibly important as an antioxidant for cancer prevention and for obviously circadian rhythms? Is that another goal, is to limit that melatonin because it's going to downregulate our body's more essential, more beneficial version of it?
Hmm. So I'm not so sure. I'm not sure about that, but I know that people don't necessarily wake up feeling as well as they would if they'd had natural sleep without any aid. So whether it downregulates your own production, that I'm not too sure.
I think the recommended dose, even in Europe, I think there's more of a green light for zero point 0.5 milligrams to 1 full milligram, as opposed to in the US where people are taking 10 milligrams and really kind of using it quite often and at higher doses. So the idea being if you're listening to this, is that the goal would be to at least limit over time, reduce that amount, and try to build in ways to regulate your sleep by perhaps going to bed at the same time. What are some of the basic recommendations if you're trying to pull away from melatonin, thinking it's all natural and it's not Ambien and Seroquel and all these other drugs that you may be offered?
Mhm.
what would be your recommendations to try to improve sort of evening resting and sleep quality?
Yeah, so I have been many thoughts on how to get better sleep at night. So first of all, like having a healthier diet. So, having a healthy diet during the day, being physically active during the day. So making sure that you're tired when it's nighttime, you're tired when it's time to fall asleep. So if you're physically active during the day, that helps you be tired at night. Um, and then in the evening, having more relaxing activities, dimming the lights at home, turning off devices, things that people tend to hear all the time, but not necessarily apply in their real life. But and also keeping stable schedules is something that we're really looking at right now as something that's good for sleep, but also good for cardiometabolic health. So having schedules, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time every day, whether it's weekday or weekend, trying not to shift that schedule of sleep helps you to train your body to fall asleep at the same time, and then you can fall asleep more readily when your body knows that this is the time that you want to sleep.
Yeah, it's interesting over the last, 15, 20 years in my marriage, we've opted out of not going to dinners late with friends. We don't go out. It's a real stretch if we go to a concert or show because they start later. Now in New York City where I trained, they used to have, obviously clubbing goes out to 4 or 5 in the morning. They have like old people clubbing where it's like, like 5 to 10 p.m. or like four to 6 p.m. I swear it's so interesting because people
That
are
is funny.
starting to really think about sleep as a
Mhm,
vital part of wellness, not just the
mhm.
food quality, not just water quality or, exercise, which gets so much attention, but sleep we take kind of for granted. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, but I think that people are starting to put more to value sleep much more now. Um, Hopefully with the messages that we send on how important it is for overall health. And also hopefully people realize that, if they've had a good night's sleep, they feel so much better than if they did not. And therefore that's a reinforcer in and of itself, right? When you wake up in the morning and you've had a good night's sleep and you feel so energetic and optimistic and happy because you've had a good night's sleep, I think that helps just reinforce the need for continuing this healthful behavior.
Yeah, and more, I think there's studies on productivity,
Mhm.
cognition, memory, definitely return on investment when it comes to, workforce output. And so there's this kind of like positive cycle that when you put in the time and the effort, um, interesting enough, even as moving into like menopause is getting a new, kind of era of attention.
Mhm.
Lots of eyes on menopause and some of the sleep related changes with menopause.
Yes.
Any thoughts that you can share on that and recommendations as people start to feel their, or even as you age, your
Mhm.
circadian rhythms change? Can you comment on both of those areas?
Yeah, so absolutely. As you age, as you're saying, your circadian rhythms change, and you have to kind of um, embrace that, right? And continue with that and adapt to these changes. And I talk about this often when I talk about coffee, right? And caffeine as disrupting sleep and being a stimulant. And I tell people if you're uh, when in your 20s, you could have a coffee at 4 p.m., 5 p.m., and it wouldn't disturb your sleep at night. But now, as you get older, as you're saying, your circadian rhythms become earlier. So you tend to fall asleep earlier or want to fall asleep earlier. And then you, if your caffeine intake also has to shift because the your ability to process caffeine is takes longer. So it takes longer to clear caffeine from your body. So you want to then advance your last coffee of the day. So you just kind of have to adapt with these changes, embrace them, and say, okay, well, I used to go to bed at midnight, but now this is not my reality anymore. I think 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or, my coffee at 4, now it's 12 to make sure that you have a good night's sleep.
And to that point, also shifting even light in the morning. I mean, I know we always have, there's recommendations for adjusting to seasonal affective disorder and, even areas of anxiety and mostly depression. I think the studies were that getting that light in the morning is really conducive to better sleep. Can you share
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on that?
Yeah, so exposure to light in the morning helps to regulate your circadian rhythms. So it helps you to set the stage for when you should be awake and when you should be sleeping. I do this all the time when I travel to the West Coast, for example. I make sure to get light exposure in the morning, try to get my circadian rhythms. But the other thing I do is start to eat at the time of my new location. So I use light, but also meal times to help to regulate my circadian rhythms, to habituate the body or let the body know that this is a daytime. This is a daytime. This is when we're active, we're outside. This is when we eat. And then it's nighttime. It's not time for this anymore. You're inside, you're in dim light, you're not eating anymore. And that I think is helpful to regulate your circadian rhythms to help you fall asleep at the right time and remain asleep.
So even for short jaunts, you're really like, I'm in the new spot, I'm in the new time zone, I'm going to kind of
Well, it
reorganize.
depends how short. If I'm going to California for 2 days and I'm coming back home, then I'm not doing that.
Right.
No. Then I'm embracing waking up at 4 a.m. because it's 7 a.m. in New York City. And I know I'll have to be back on that schedule when I'm home. But no, if I'm there for an extended period of time and I want to get on their schedule and feel good, yes.
Okay.
If I'm thinking, it's not worth the effort and I need to get back home, then I try to stay on my New York time in a way.
I love that. And look, I love these personal adaptations to lifestyle from all of the research that you've done. It's just so refreshing and interesting. And then light at night. I know LAN, it's called, that can be light under the door. That could be an alarm clock. That could be a bathroom light. It could be a night light in case you decide to have that. Is light at night a disruption given the fact that sort of the eyes, the pineal gland kind of can, pick up on that and maybe tell the body it's time to wake up and go hunting anthropologically versus sort of like getting good sleep? How do you talk about light at night in terms of necessity or blocking it?
Yeah, so Phyllis Z actually did a really nice study. She was looking at that light exposure at night and how it would influence your cardiometabolic health and showing that it has an adverse effect. Now, I think it was much more than just like light under the door
Yeah.
or, a little night light. I think it was more about, light emission from a television or something much, much brighter would have adverse effects on cardiometabolic health. It also makes it harder to fall asleep. And then when you know, we talked about stages of sleep, right? So, when you go through cycles of sleep, you go back into a lighter stage of sleep. If at this lighter stage you have something that awakes you, then you can have a full awakening. And then for some people, waking up in the middle of the night makes it harder to fall asleep, right? So some people can wake up, use the restroom for a minute, go back to sleep, no problem. But for others, they start thinking about different things and it makes it harder to fall asleep. Then you have a lot of wake time in the middle of the night. So those are the things you want to try to avoid. And if you're having more light at night, that might make it more difficult to maintain your sleep throughout the night.
So just with patients, I've been kind of offering up some ideas that I'd love you to chime in with. But basically, if you have an electric alarm clock, which a lot of people may or may not use anymore, right, with modern day technology and their iPhones or whatever they have, but you want to sort of tell them to keep it out of eye shot. So if you're going to have an alarm clock that's electric, lower it so that if you were to roll over in bed, you wouldn't necessarily open up your eyes and see that and kind of get a stimulation. Or again, bathroom light, night light, keep them below eye shot from the bed view. Dark out shades. If you're at a hotel and they have the double shades, that's great. But at home, you can also recreate sort of that light not being able to come in. Any kind of other ideas?
Yeah, all very good tips. I tell people if you're waking up to use the restroom in the middle of the night, try not to not turn on the lights,
Right.
keep your eyes closed if you can make it safely.
Right.
Um, and,
Dimmers. I
and
mean, you can
yeah,
adjust, you can add dimmers to your home. I mean, the setup for sleep is kind of so important, I think, between temperature. What's the recommended
yeah,
temperature that you suggest to clients and patients?
yeah. So cool temperatures at night, whatever feels comfortable to you. Of course, you don't want to be too cold. You don't want to be too hot. So that whatever that sweet spot is for you, I think, anything that could be personalized is better. And
Okay,
sometimes it's difficult if you're two people in the same room, the same bed with different, tolerance for a temperature. It could be a negotiation.
for sure. That could be a deal breaker actually for
Yeah.
many. But yeah, no, my husband, he always fights over the temperature going down to 66, and my boys are hot-blooded, and
Well,
I'm like freezing every night. I'm like in
yeah.
4 layers. So I guess you're not going to get into marital issues there, but yeah, it's a battle, and even at hotels, it's a battle when you're with people.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, the cooler temperatures are better for cardiometabolic health, or not
Better
necessarily.
to help you fall asleep as well. Yes.
They
Cooler
do help
temperatures
you. Okay, interesting.
with
So
sleep.
keeping it a cool
Yeah.
room, low
Yeah.
light, low sound, pets off your head.
Exactly.
That's a good idea. How
Yes.
about naps? How do naps play into modern day living? Are they harmful,
hmm
or can they really be helpful and restorative?
Yeah. So naps, people ask about naps all the time. It's interesting. But, there's something that we didn't talk too much about in terms of the process of falling asleep and your ability to fall asleep, right? So as the day goes on, you build sleep pressure, right? You build fatigue throughout the day, but we talk about the circadian system. The circadian system during the daytime, melatonin is not there. It opposes this sleepiness. So if you've built up sleep at 4 p.m., you're not falling asleep, even though you've accumulated already maybe 8, 9, 10 hours of wakefulness and sleepiness is accumulated during this time. You're not falling asleep because your circadian system is not letting you fall asleep because it's not the right time. And when this melatonin level starts to rise, that's when the body's signaling you that now is time. So now you have high pressure for sleep because if you accumulated sleepiness during the day, now your circadian system's telling you it's right. Now's the time you could fall asleep. If you have a nap, what you're doing is reducing this sleep pressure.
Mm,
You're dissipating some of that sleepiness, and then you're less tired when it's time to fall asleep. It makes it a little harder for you to fall asleep if you've dissipated too much
I get it.
of your sleepiness during the day. So if you're going to nap, it shouldn't be too close to bedtime because you want to be able to rebuild some of that sleep pressure, that sleepiness after that nap. And it can't be too long that you've dissipated too much of that sleep pressure. So you want it to keep it short and try to keep it on the earlier side. And then there's all the questions about why do you need a nap and how and what is that how is that impacting other aspects of your health, your cardiometabolic health, but also your cognitive health, um, learning, memory, uh, all those other aspects. So in some circumstances, a nap might be beneficial because it will dissipate some of that sleepiness and will keep you alert when you wake up from the nap. So in some cases, you might need that, right? It might be important. So I'm thinking maybe shift workers, if they could have a napping uh, site or an opportunity in the middle of their shift when it's harder to remain awake, that might be good for alertness. But for cardiovascular risk factors, it might not be such a good thing depending on, how much sleep you get at night. So if you're getting
Right.
good sleep at night, adequate amount, and you also get a long nap during the day, that's been associated with worse cardiovascular health. So questions then, like, why do you need a nap? If the ideal would be to have healthful sleep and restful sleep during the nighttime so that you don't need a nap. But if you do need a nap, to keep it short and keep it earlier.
I love that. And they're even starting to put like napping pods in some of these
Hmm.
office buildings, and corporations are incorporating, just again to add to the
Hmm.
productivity of their employees. And
Yeah.
that's the question is, are they good for you? Are they more considered to be like a failure of your underlying sleep process? And I think that's
Hmm. Hmm.
individualized. I think people need to kind of look at their own habits and see where they can tweak and see if they can push more healthy sleep to the hours at
Yeah.
night. Maybe not so much nap time, but if it helps and keeps people functioning, certainly driving. We worry
Yeah.
about, accidents on the road. A lot of that
Exactly. So
occurs.
sometimes pulling over, taking a
Right.
little nap can be very useful there.
Yeah.
But, you also have to think about this in terms of, it was staying up later last night that useful if
Yeah.
now I'm not productive during the day and
Right.
I need a nap to be functional? Maybe not, right? And so, balancing your time in a
Right.
way that's
Prioritizing. Was it worth the concert and being
right,
sleepy, or was the best concert ever, or could you have just kind of let it go and waited for the next great band?
right.
Couple other, I mean, I've gone through so many of your papers, and I just couldn't be here all day. I just wanted to ask you about insulin resistance and sleep. I know you had this beautiful paper about, looking at how sleep impairs insulin sensitivity and also adiposity changes. So really weight and sleep and insulin and sleep and how those may be connected.
Hmm. Hmm. So, uh, we've completed some uh, long-term sleep restriction studies, right, to look at how restricting sleep can influence your cardiovascular health. And we found really adverse effects on multiple outcomes. Found adverse effects on blood pressure, adverse effects on insulin resistance, so your ability to handle glucose is impaired. And this could be related to circadian rhythms, so your body's ability to handle glucose changes throughout the day based on the time of day. You're meant to handle nutrients during the daytime. So if you're, eating later at night, that's not the right time to be eating for better glucose handling, for example. So if you're, delaying bedtime, staying up later, you tend to be eating later as well. That could have adverse impact on glucose metabolism, so insulin resistance that you mentioned. So those are all things that we've seen to be related to insufficient sleep. And what we saw too was not with very severe sleep restrictions. So there have been studies of, you know, where researchers restrict sleep duration to less than 4 hours per night and find adverse health effects. For us, what we did was reduce sleep by an hour and a half, but do this for 6 weeks. And of course, we take people who sleep adequately to begin with. So usually our participants sleep about 7.5 hours per night. So restricting by an hour and a half, you're going down to about 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 hours is not unheard of. A lot of people report sleeping 6 hours per night on the constant on a regular
Routinely,
basis
yeah.
as their normal. So what we're finding is if you're restricting to even just that level that's adopted by so many people, it could play a role on your cardiovascular health.
And so disease development, diabetes, prediabetes, and diabetes, it can contribute.
Correct.
Does it work the other way around, chicken or the egg? If you have prediabetes or diabetes, is there anything to show that actually affects circadian rhythm, that affects your sleep, conversely or inversely?
Yeah. So that I'm less familiar with that. It's possible, but
Yeah.
yeah,
It'd be interesting to see that. And then in terms of weight gain, ability to lose weight, such a big thing in
hmm. Hmm.
society. Certainly, I've
Yep.
thought about that as well with Ozempic and all these things that we're trying to do to lose weight. Is there a sleep instruction or manual in terms of not
Yeah.
having to rely on medications necessarily to lose weight? Is there a connection?
Yeah. Well, definitely. Yeah. Having good sleep at night is instrumental to any weight management program. We've shown that if you have too little sleep, uh, you eat more foods, just eat more in general, and you tend to choose lower quality foods. And there's been studies that have also shown that if you increase your sleep duration, you tend to eat less. And so the more you increase your sleep duration, the better you are at reducing your food intake. And so those, go hand in hand. So really you need to have adequate sleep to be able to to maintain a healthy diet and also to adhere to weight loss recommendations, weight loss programs.
I love it. I mean, so what you're saying is that sleep is, I don't know, evolutionary, anthropologic,
Yeah.
beneficial. It's helps with inflammation reduction. It helps with insulin management,
Hmm.
and sensitivity. It helps with, cognition, function, just so many benefits. And it's easy to mess with because we do. And we might
Hmm.
want to try to pull back on that and make some better
Yeah.
choices. And you gave so many wonderful recommendations. I could talk to you all day. I have like a list of 20 different things I would still like to ask you. But if you had listeners listening to this and wanted to share with them, say, the top three, maybe five, but you could give what you like, of things that they could do right now or for this evening's sleep. What are the three things that people could say, oh, okay, I'm going to work on this. This is a priority and I'm going to get going. Thanks to Dr. St-Onge, I am going to get going. Here's what she told me to do and I'm going to implement.
I think so diet wise, to have a colorful diet. So and focusing on plant-based foods, so more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, walnuts, pistachios, almonds, all, very good for you. Um, being physically active. Uh, the three pillars of health to me, right? Having good sleep, a healthy diet, and being physically active, and then how to get all three of those because they impact each other, right? If you have good sleep at night, you'll have the energy to be physically active. You'll be able to make healthful decisions that also translate to better decisions on what to choose to eat and whether to exercise or not exercise. So all of three are very important for one another. And then I think having stable schedules for sleep, but also for meals is quite important for overall health.
Wonderful. And less reliance on supplements, more reliance on routines that are a little harder to get involved with, but certainly have greater potential benefit and less harm risk. So I think
Absolutely.
this has all been amazing and wonderful. And every word you've said is a soundbite for, like, it's just wonderful information and really useful, especially in our busy, hectic lives. What is your view on the future in terms of your work, or what are your plans for next projects? What are you interested in? Share with us.
Yeah. So, I'm very interested in evaluating different diets, but not only looking at the foods per se, but dietary patterns. So timing of when you eat and how is that relevant for sleep, but also for cardiometabolic health. So I think those are all things that, we talk about nutrients, we talk about diet quality, but there's many other aspects of what you eat and how you eat
Mm-hmm.
and that the eating behavior that's relevant for health. So I think, the eating behavior, the sleeping behavior are all, are two behaviors that are, very close to me and I think are important to evaluate for cardiometabolic health.
And sex differences, just to squeak one
Hmm.
more component in, is there something we should know? Any fun facts on males versus females in sleep and whether that's translates into recommendations to the audience?
Yeah. So one of the things that we found in our research early on was related to hormones that regulate appetite
Hmm.
and how they're impacted by insufficient sleep. So Uh, and what we found was that in men, there was an increase in the hormone that promotes appetite.
Hmm.
And in women, there was a decrease in the hormone that promotes satiety.
Mm.
So, the end result is the same, but how it happens is different, right? So for men, there's more of a push to eat, and women, there's less of a stoppage, a breakage of to stop eating. The end result is there's overeating with
Right.
with too little sleep. But I thought that was very interesting. And
Totally.
of course, the hormone that we found in women that was reduced with short sleep is GLP-1.
Hmm.
As you know, the weight loss medications all GLP-1 or
Right.
something like
So
that. So,
yet another aspect of
hmm
improving sleep is to sort of
yeah,
formulate your own levels of GLP-1 internally and keep
exactly.
working to promote that beneficial component to our gut.
Yeah.
It's been such a pleasure. You're continuing your work in your lab at this amazing, Center of Excellence for Sleep and Circadian Research at Columbia University in New York. I think it's just remarkable. And really excited to have you. I know our audience is too. So thank you so much. Is there anything, any last minutes, anything else you want to share, anywhere people can follow your work?
So, I have a website, Marie-Pierre St-Onge.com. You could check out some of the stuff there. I also published a book called Eat Better, Sleep Better.
That's right.
That provides information about the science of sleep and diet, but also gives recipes that were developed by my co-author, Kat Cradock. And it's a good way to put these recommendations into action.
I love it. And I am sorry I didn't mention that because I was so absorbed by all of your published peer-reviewed articles and things you've just, come up with. It's just been a remarkable journey to learn about your work. And certainly we will have the link for your book, Eat Better, Sleep Better. And it's filled with recipes and wonderful things that put into play what you've discussed in terms of beneficial nutrients and food groups that really help promote quality and quantity of sleep. So
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. St-Onge. It is a pleasure to have you. We will include all of the links to everything in our episode, including an extensive bio. So really appreciate your help and your time with all this great information.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure speaking with you this morning.